I want to once again, welcome everyone for this webinar today. It's a very special webinar. My name is Marcio Galeato. I'm a MHPSS.net co-director. I'm based in São Paulo, Brazil. Welcome everyone, and hand over for my colleague Ananda Galapati on behalf of the working group, Peacebuilding working group and MHPSS working group. Over to you, Ananda.
Thank you so much, Marcio. Welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to greet you all on behalf of the ISC MHPSS reference group and its thematic, let me change the slide, and its thematic working group on MHPSS and peacebuilding for this, our latest webinar in a series on the intersection between these two fields. For some of you who are not so familiar with the ISC MHPSS reference group, was established back in December 2007 and consists of more than 50 members representing quite a unique collaboration between NGOs, UN, and international agencies and academics to promote best practices in MHPSS. And to support the field, the reference group works through thematic working groups that facilitate the development and dissemination of guidance on specific areas of MHPSS. And the MHPSS and Peacebuilding Working Group is one of these and was established in February 2019, and it's currently co-chaired by GIZ and UNFPA with members from agencies working in very diverse contexts across the world. And the current focus of this group's work is to strengthen the linkages between MHPSS and peacebuilding through the development of practical guidance and through facilitation of technical discussions and exchange. And this webinar series is a part of the latter, and we're delighted that one of our members, the MHPSS Collaborative, has taken the leadership in convening this particular panel on the International Day of Peace. And I'd really very like to warmly welcome Dr. Maggie Owusu of the Collaborative to take over now as the moderator of this session. Over to you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Ananda. Let me get my slides up and make sure that that goes okay. Yeah. All right. So thank you again, Ananda. We are delighted to welcome everyone to this interactive panel and discussion on whole system transformation, interlinking climate justice, youth engagement, and intersectional equity for MHPSS and peacebuilding. I'm Maggie Owusu, MHPSS and Equity Advisor with the MHPSS Collaborative, and I'm the moderator for this panel and discussion today, joining from Vermont, USA. Let's see my slide, there we go. So yeah, I hope to start us off well by doing three things. So I'm gonna offer some background and framing on our topic. I'm gonna speak a little slowly today to give our interpreters time to get our messages interpreted well. So after introducing some concepts and backgrounds, I'm going to briefly introduce our honored panelists. I'm so excited to hear them speak today. It seems really inspiring. And also orienting everyone to sort of the easy interactive process of our webinar today. And I've got a little breathe message down there. That's mostly for me. Right around now I get excited, so it's to breathe, but I also ask everyone if you like to take a moment to land in the room together. It's a nice time to take a deep breath and kind of tune in. Let's begin. We now live in a world where young people's co-ownership of MHPSS and peacebuilding is key to securing a nurturing planet for children and next generations. Now, I believe that many of us may have attended the important and wonderful high-level event on MHPSS that was hosted by the ISC MHPSS reference group about 2 weeks ago. And if I'm recalling well, some of the messaging we heard seemed to be that there's both hopeful emerging evidence and much needed work yet to be done at the intersections of MHPSS and peacebuilding. Some of the MHPSS and peacebuilding priorities laid out were broadly around integration of the fields, cross-fertilization of ideas and methods, and joint development of practical guidance. We've heard these before. This is where the work is. Today's webinar on International Peace Day picks up on this theme of cross-fertilization and expands it. We do this by drawing attention to some critical and emerging challenges and innovation for addressing the mental health and psychosocial well-being and peace among children, youth, and families in fragile settings. The critical and emerging areas we'll focus on today are the interlinkages between climate justice, youth engagement, and intersectional equity with MHPSS and peacebuilding. So attention to climate has long been an integral part of peace activism. And attention to climate is also accelerating rapidly in MHPSS. The important shift that we're living now is that the connections between climate justice, decolonization, anti-racism, youth engagement, intersectional equity, peacebuilding, and MHPSS are all essential components at the very center of what it's going to take to ensure a nurturing planet for children and next generations. And in order to work on all of these components simultaneously and seamlessly, and with efficiency to make the meaningful impacts that we want to make, it seems like that we're going to need, or some might say it's already happening, significant system transformation. So when we say system transformation today, we're referring generally sort of to the widespread global call being heard right now from across diverse contexts and movements. And this call is for new forms of human organization and new forms of collective intervention to innovatively respond to many critical and emerging challenges in these areas. So today, these include the unfinished work of decolonization of humanitarian aid, coupled with putting into practice the recent IASC commitments to anti-racism. These challenges are the existing structures that create inequities between MHPSS researchers in low and middle income countries and those in high income countries, which often fall along racial lines, with white researchers, often from high income countries, holding privileged positions relative to Black, Brown, and Indigenous researchers, often from low and middle income countries. There have been challenges presented by youth to adults, especially the challenge by the youth champions of the Copenhagen 2020 Action Plan for Child, Youth, and Family MHPSS. They demanded that adults start a new mindset with honest communication, active listening, respect, and validation for young people's expertise in MHPSS research, policy, and practice. And the fact last year when the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was young people who showed their ambition and skill by uniting over 330 delegates from over 100 countries to a mock COP26 process. The youth-led mock COP delivered a declaration. This declaration included policy points calling on all countries to provide child-friendly mental health services. It provided testimony on how climate change has exacerbated community conflict over water, food, and land in some places. And also it provided documentation on how children, young people, and historically excluded groups are particularly at risk for climate-related mental health threats. The challenges that we face also include the reality that at least 7 of the 12 current peacekeeping missions are based in countries most susceptible to climate change. And some of these countries also have the most youthful populations in the world. And lastly, at least for today, we're talking about the challenges that Afghan youth leaders working at the forefront of peace and innovation, who have grown up through 2 decades of displacement and war, are facing. These leaders are facing a situation where approximately 16 million people in Afghanistan right now are in need of humanitarian aid and living under an occupying regime that is not committed to upholding human rights. When we say system transformation, we believe we need to exceed the foundational framework of the IASA transformative agenda that was agreed to by the UN principles in 2011 and move into 2022 more deeply, perhaps toward co-unmaking unjust, unsustainable systems, and then co-creating a nurturing, regenerative, equitable world. We are excited and honored today to be hearing about these critical and emerging issues from 4 powerful panelists. They are Laura Hessler, Director of Musicians Without Borders, Farida Amiri, founder of Peace Friends, Sophia Hernandez Salazar, co-founder of Latinas for Climate, and Jennifer Uchendu, founder of Stussy Vibes. All of these panelists are activists and leaders. Some will be speaking with slides, others will be speaking directly to camera. All will be sharing their deep knowledge and lived experience related to transformation for climate justice, youth engagement, equity, MHPSS, and peace building. May their words show us pathways for unmaking unjust, unsustainable systems. May their words show us how to build back and co-create a nurturing, regenerative, equitable world. I'll be introducing each of them with a little bit more detail before they speak. And I'd also like to acknowledge right now the Global Voices Kenya team of English to Spanish and English to French interpreters working with us today. Douglas, Stratton, Moses, Choka, thank you for your work to broaden inclusion in this room. Now, to promote interaction during the webinar, I'd like to invite everybody to do 2 things. So one is right now, and the second is at some point during the webinar. So first, I'd like to ask everyone right now to please post a response to this question. And the question is, what is your role in the current global story of system transformation? Are you a catalyst, perhaps a leader, perhaps a skeptic? Just post where you are in this story. And I just want to check and see, make sure I get a signal from someone that chats are coming in.
Thanks, Maggie. Just to let you know, we just had a brief glimpse of your email, so maybe don't do that again.
Thank you. I'm not sure what's happening, but okay. Are you seeing slides? Or are you seeing all my talking points too?
No, we're just seeing your slides.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. All right, well, thanks everyone for the participation, and thanks Ananda for the great teamwork. So just a second, what I'd really like everyone to do is to invite you to post at least one question or one comment for the panelists sometime in the chat at some point during the webinar. And this is because the panelists themselves, you know, MHPSS.net, MHPSS and Peacebuilding Working Group co-hosts, and I'll be paying attention to what's in that chat and then using that to help formulate the questions for about 20 minutes of discussion following the presentation. I'd also just like to note that we unfortunately are not sure if one of our speakers is going to join us today. So Sophia Hernandez, we're crossing fingers that she shows up. And
she's in the room.
She's in the room.
Yes, and she's a co-host now, so she's all set.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ananda. All right then. So now it's my great pleasure to welcome our first panelist, Laura Hessler. Laura is the director of Musicians Without Borders, an organization that uses the power of music to bridge divides, build community, and heal wounds of war. Laura's combined background in civil rights and peace activism, as well as her diverse musical network, led her to found Musicians Without Borders in 1999, persuaded of music's unique potential as a tool for peace building and social change. Laura?
Thank you very much, Maggie, and hello, everyone. I'm very honored to be part of this webinar and among such interesting and inspiring company. I'm not going to talk about Musicians Without Borders today, although I do hope that everybody will take a look at our website and maybe get to know some of the work that we've done with music as a power to connect in the context of war and armed conflict. But I am going to talk a little bit about something that has given me some hope, some ways of staying active, a lifelong role as an activist in one way or another. I'm going to share some very depressing figures with you and a kind of some ideas that help me in any case to continue to have a way of understanding the ways that we can work, the ways that we can understand the world that we're in and how we can see our own role in that. But first I'd like to start with a poem. It's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, the reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? The Buddhist scholar, climate activist, teacher, and elder Joanna Macy suggests that connecting with and speaking to our descendants is a healthy way of gaining perspective on our own present lives and imagining what might be asked of us now. What would they want us to have done now? How would they like to look back at us and what we left them? Perhaps your great-great-grandchildren also keep you awake. I know that mine do. So the poem asks, what did you do once you knew? So what do we know? Here are a few numbers. How much money was spent on war last year? That's almost 2 trillion US dollars, 1,981,000,000 world military spending in 2020. The fact that a few billionaires in our world own as much wealth as half of the world's population. The fact that there are 82 million refugees estimated this last year. And I can tell you, I follow these numbers. I use them often in presentations, and I can tell you that that top number keeps growing. The bottom number keeps growing, and the middle number keeps shrinking. That is, fewer and fewer rich people own more and more, as more and more poorer people own less and less. A few more numbers for you. Estimated number of refugee children living without parents or family, and this is 2019, 110,000. The percentage of animal life that is expected to be extinct by 2050, less than 30 years from now. The number of years we have to reduce emissions to zero, and note that this is from a climate report from 3 years ago. So what is it that prevents the human inhabitants of our shared planet from living together in peace? What prevents us from creating workable, shareable, sustainable alternatives? And what is the force that is used over and over again to divide us from each other, allowing the greedy and the powerful to run the world? And most especially, how do those of us who want to be change makers stay sane and hopeful, knowing something about these numbers and their interrelationship? So I'd like to share with you a framework by this same Joanna Macy that I quoted about the ancestors that has helped me a lot in staying sane and in formulating my own quite tentative answers to those great-great-grandchildren. Active hope, how to face the mess we're in without going crazy. So Joanna Macy describes describes three stories, three narratives, parallel narratives that can describe the world today as we're living in. The first of these she calls business as usual. Business as usual describes our industrialized economies, the mantra of economic growth for prosperity, the belief that nature is a commodity to be used for human purposes, that consumption is good for the economy, that the central plot is about getting ahead, and that the problems of other people, other nations, other species are not our concern. This is the world that we live in. This is the world of those numbers that I showed you, and those numbers tell a story. And that story is about the connection between wealth and poverty, between prosperous, so-called peaceful countries, and those places around the world whose names evoke images of unending cycles of violence: the Balkans, Palestine, Guatemala, Syria, Yemen, more and more, of course. And those numbers, increasing each year, tell us that we are living in a time of unprecedented spirals of threats to human survival: poverty, inequality, climate change, economic collapse, the concentration of reckless, irresponsible power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and the devastation of war, the force that holds these destructive dynamics in place. Add on now a global health crisis that intensifies all of the above. This is what business as usual has created. So the second story that Joanna Macy describes, she calls the Great Unravelling, the impact of business as usual. The Great Unravelling is economic decline. It's resource depletion, climate change, social division and war, mass extinction of the species, new diseases, pandemics. And this is also the world that we live in. So I think a lot about fear and the way that fear has helped to allow business as usual to continue and be perpetuated. It is what we experience in the Great Unravelling as well. These feelings of helplessness, grief, panic, loneliness. Thinking about fear as a weapon and fear also as a reasonable response to true threats. How to see the power and possibilities to contribute in the face of this fear. How to imagine the potential for real change. How to stay sane. And so we come to the third story. And the third story she calls the Great Turning. And the Great Turning is the commitment to act for the sake of life on Earth, in which social and technological innovations converge. The Great Turning is the mobilization of people's energy, attention, creativity, and determination. And this, my friends, is also the world that we live in. Never in human history have so many people, so many communities, so many organizations been working toward this great turning. Working to reduce fear by strengthening empathy. Working to build bridges, break down walls, open gates, embrace our common humanity, live in interdependence. The Great Turning is the hardest of these three stories to see because it gets so much less publicity than the other two. Joanna Macy says we have to train ourselves to see it, but this is our story. And if you're like me, most of us and most of our efforts fly under the radar. And maybe sometimes we think that our work doesn't have much impact. But big changes and huge shifts only happen when work under the radar has gone on for years. I love two special quotes from Martin Luther King. He was one of my heroes as growing up as a child. And King speaks about the great urgency of now. And he also spoke about the moral arc of the universe being long, but bending toward justice. And holding these two contradictions is something that I think is something that we all need to do. So speaking of holding, Here are the elements of the Great Turning, as Macy describes them. First of all, she talks about holding actions. Holding actions hold back and slow down the damage of business as usual. They counter the Great Unravelling, the unraveling of social fabric. They include care for those who have been damaged, safeguarding against exploitation, war, starvation, injustice, and defending shared existence and the integrity of life. The second element of the Great Turning she calls life-sustaining systems, developing new social and economic structures, the creative redesign of structures and systems, repurposing expertise that has been used for business as usual. This life-sustaining systems asks the question, is there a better way to do things? One that brings benefit rather than causing harm. And the third part of the Great Turning she describes as the shift in consciousness, the realization of the interdependency of all life, that we are not the owners, but the protectors of the earth. We look to indigenous peoples for leadership in this. This shift of consciousness includes connection, empathy, regard for the spiritual, and as she says, paying attention to the inner frontier of change. So thinking of those great-great-grandchildren and thinking about the Great Turning, and thinking about not knowing where it is all going, I would add a few reflections of my own. First of all, we have to think about the global context, the causes and interconnections, and we have to get together. Just as these causes are interconnected, so must we be. The second is that we must learn to be allies rather than rescuers, because rescuers help to sustain this cycle. We must think of self-care and we must think of community care. Self-care, I think, is meaningless if we're not caring for each other. We must hold our grief and express it. It's legitimate. And our anger is also legitimate, but it can't take control of us. And I think most importantly, we have to stand in this moment of radical uncertainty, which puts us firmly in the now, radical love, and understand that the place of action is the only definition of hope. I hope that these thoughts are helpful. I hope that they're a good way to start off our seminar. To me, they've been a way of staying sane and remaining an activist for peace building, for community care, in our case, through the arts. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. See if that will, whoops, I'm sorry. Stop share, that should work. There we go. And also introduce our next panelist. So I'm very honored to introduce our second panelist, who is Farida Amiri. Farida was born in Afghanistan and lived her childhood as a refugee in a neighboring country. In 2019, she founded Peace Friends, a youth-led and youth-focused initiative aiming to promote peace and social harmony, support young people to become change makers, and raise awareness on U.S. Security Council youth peace policies. Farida.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Maggie. Hello, everyone. This is Farida Amiri, and I'm originally from Afghanistan, but I'm talking to everyone from Ljubljana, where I have been somehow forced to flee to some extent. But at the same time, it does not give me good feeling that I'm safe here, but many of my fellow Afghan youth and also Afghan women are not safe, and situation is getting worse and worse there. But anyways, thank you so much for giving me the platform. And I think this is one of the most appropriate platform for me to convey the voices of some marginalized people. Though this is the special day of International Peace Day, but it is somehow very difficult for me to celebrate the day, though my country is, I would say, in a huge and big disaster at the moment. So thanks so much. I would like to, at the very beginning, I would like to give a very brief reflection on the peace process in Afghanistan and also current situation in the country. So I'm pretty sure that many people here are well aware of the peace process that we went through and also the current situation. However, I believe that media is not always to cover every single I would say event going on in the country, but I think it is worth reflecting on the, I would say, on the events or on the circumstances that taking place on the ground. And yeah, so I think peace process was a very good, at the same time was a very good opportunity for particularly a very important group of the country, I mean young people, to figure out their role and to figure out how they will be able to advocate for their participation, for their role in the peace process, because it was somehow a very, I would say, unique opportunity for the majority of people, I would say including me, though we did face so many challenges just because of advocating for our role in the peace process. So yeah, I think this gave them to play a role, though they were not able to play a role as actors inside the room, but they somehow the young people, the Afghan young people could have the chance or could create the chance for themselves to play a significant role as actors around the room and also outside the room. So how they were able to do so was through conducting peace dialogues, first of all, I mean, in the first layer among themselves, and then engaging whether directly or indirectly the high profile people who were inside the room, I mean, people or members of the negotiating team. So this gave the young people the platform, or I would say even the courage uh, uh, to involve and to engage decision makers in order to somehow convince them, or to some extent make them that what the demands of young people, particularly young women, are, because we felt that we are extremely marginalized from the process or from the decision making process, regardless of only peace process. So that was, like I would say, a very alert sign to the young people. And another role that these are very few examples of how young people were able to play significant role in the peace process or in any peace building activities. So I only give these two as a very, I would say, primary example, though there are out so many I would say extraordinary examples of peace building efforts of young people of Afghanistan. So they were also able to publish their own pieces on the mechanisms that can help the parties to include young people in the process through publishing their pieces on whether online or print media. So they somehow could occupy positively the media as well. So I guess I gave a little bit of information about the participation of young people in the peace process, because we can connect that to the current situation of Afghanistan as well. So I think these efforts of people gave the current people, I mean, gave to our own generation the courage, and I would say even the yes, the courage to demand for their own participation or for their own role in the society, not only on the political level, but in different levels, to demand even from the most, I would say, violent group in the world, like the Taliban. So as the media has also covered that, many of the, I would say, women, surprisingly, had the courage to get out of to go outside on the street and demand from the most violent group about their right, like right to education, like to work. So I think their courage to demand their basic rights from such a very, very, I would say, fundamentalist group is not mainly but part of the efforts that have been taken place period to Taliban took over Afghanistan. So I would say this is one of the outcomes of such a efforts, or such a, I would say, their demand to ask for their rights. And at the same time, so I would definitely say, or I would definitely agree that I mean, facing such a challenges and even doubling your efforts to even demand for your very, very, very basic right that is non-negotiable, like right to education or right to work for particularly women and young women. So I think that is not out of any challenge, or that's not out of any obstacle that we face. So I mean, such a circumstances has also led to a very, very violent exclusion of a particular and a very important part of the society, and this all have led us to go through some mental health issues. So I mean, that is a bit difficult to overcome, because I mean, that is also associated with some cultural norms that's not really, I would say, sensible, because I mean, in some societies, particularly in Afghanistan, this is not very common, or this is not part of even our culture to refer to a psychologist openly, or to just, I would say, to just say that openly to the people around you, that I do need a psychologist, or I do need to refer to a psychologist, because me as a peace builder maybe to some extent need the most such a mental health support, because I mean, we are dealing with very heartbreaking and with very I would say severe scenarios, or even realities. I mean, working on the ground in the field of peace building somehow led us to deal with, I would say, sometimes very serious mental health issues. So that's why, I mean, when I thought that referring to the society would not help me the most, so that's why I decided to be part of another I would say women network, who focused a lot on mental health of women peace builders, not only in few countries, but in the majority of countries around the world. So that really helped me a lot, because I was somehow feeling so much comfortable to disclose any of my mental health issues with them, because they provided me the platform to be safe and to be secured in terms of my issue. So that was a very good experience for me, and that's why I decided to somehow even implement very few parts of them inside my country and with my fellow young peace builders, particularly the young women. So we could somehow help each other, and at the same time, I thought that my own initiative, Peace Friends, can be a very good platform to even give that space to my own peace builder fellows. I mean, to give them safe space to share their own problem, and then if I'm not able to help them in that regards, at least I can connect them with the network that I was connected with. So this was one of the very basic solution to, I mean, the issues, mental health issues that we went through, and you know, and everybody knows that the pandemic somehow increased those issues around us. So I thought that that would be a very good solution at the moment, and that really helped us a lot. And I mean, even I personally implement those, I would say, solution during the tough time that I am facing these days, as I would say, displacement is very difficult. I know that I'm not displaced in my country, but also outside. So that was a very good experience for me, being part of, such a networks, and asking help from colleagues, from friends, and at the same time tackle at the same time dealing with the mental health issues. So I'm so grateful of being peace builder, or being active in the field of peace building, because that gave the platform for another NGOs who have been active in another areas like environment, like climate change. So they somehow approached us to be part of their own initiative, or they can be part of our own initiative. So we did have collaborative relationship, and we did have some exchange events together. So that was like a mobilization of different organizations and different NGOs. And
Farida, just at the last minute, yeah.
Yes. I noticed that I do have very few time. Just I want to conclude and conclude my talking points by saying that it is very difficult to be strong enough, considering the situation of the country. Though I am safe, but it is very difficult for me to ignore what is really going on in the country. And yes, and thank you so much. Sorry if I did not have the consistency of my talks. That is totally because of what we really go through, and that's a bit difficult to deal that very easily. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Farida. Thank you so much for all of the time and communication and generosity that you've given all of us today with sharing your lived experience and leadership and ideas for innovation going forward, and really speaking into the power of youth and the intersections of peace building and mental health and psychosocial support. Thank you so much. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Sophia Hernandez Salazar. Sophia is a human rights activist focused on gender equality, climate justice, and youth. She is part of Fridays for Future Costa Rica, Young Leaders Costa Rica. She co-founded Latinas for Climate, and she went to COP25 as part of the Costa Rican delegation. And I also believe that she participated in mock COP26 as well. Perhaps she'll mention that. Sophia, welcome to the panel.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here today to hear and listen to amazing activists and people that not only today, but in their, in their lives, they are fighting to have a more peaceful. Can you give me a minute? My dad, I don't know where. Yeah. So, and they are fighting their lives to have a better future and more sustainable and peaceful societies. So, my talking points and what I'm going to talk about today is basically about peace, but peace as someone that lives in Costa Rica thinks that peace actually is. Well, if you hear about Costa Rica, you will hear that we don't have army, that we are this green country, that we are protecting human rights, and that we're one of the most solid democracies in Latin America. And yeah, that's right. We have, I mean, in our society, if you live here, you're going to talk about and you're going to listen how Costa Rica is a very peaceful country, that we will never face the day that someone from our family is going to war, because we have build a whole, I would say, institutionality that is all about peace and human rights. But what about Latin America? What about actually other human rights that are being at risk in our country, in Latin America? One of them, I would say, is the right of a healthy environment and the right of indigenous communities to defend lands without being killed or being a threat. And well, Latin America is basically the most unequal region. We're talking about socioeconomic conflicts, as one of the peers already said and mentioned: Venezuela, Colombia, I would say Nicaragua, my neighbor country. Those countries, and even Brazil, they are living different social economic conflicts and even some political ones that if I live here in Costa Rica, maybe I'm not being impacted directly. But as a Latin American in Central America, this is something that is going to impact at some point. Well, as I already said, Costa Rica built this institutionality towards peaceful, and it's because since basically 70 years ago, sorry, we abolished the army after a huge civil war. Then in the late 80s, when basically all Central America was in social economical conflict, we had even a dictator in Nicaragua. Costa Rica was trying to build peace, and this is where, you know, the Central America peace treaties came. And since in these treaties, they're still, you know, working right now. And this is why, as a Costa Rican, as a Central America, and different persons and activists from Central America, we need to still to demand to these treaties to be, you know, something that is also currently working right now. Well, Costa Rica is also a very sustainable country. We also have built this whole institutionality towards sustainability since the late 90s and even before that. But it was like a breaking point, because in the late 90s, Costa Rica approved the biodiversity law, the forest law. Then we were one of the first countries in Latin America to have this program about payments for environmental services. At the end of the day, that we can say that that means like green funds. So in the late 90s, Costa Rica has a whole system about green funds and how to, I would say, promote to have environmental and social economical ideas that can, you know, you can reactivate economy, you can have a sustainable economy at the same way that you're protecting the environment. And that's something that Costa Rica has, you know, from a long time. But what about now? We're talking about that. When we talk about peace, we're talking about wars, about social economic conflicts. But we also need to talk about how lives are being put at risk. And climate change is one of those problems, one of those problematics. Only in Costa Rica, well, sorry, in Central America, up to 5 million people are going to migrate because climate change. We're talking about food insecurity, water insecurity. We're talking about those social economic conflicts that we're living right now, including Costa Rica, are going to increase, and this is going to demand, and it is going to make the people are going to migrate, and they are actually migrating right now. And this is something that maybe here in Central America we don't really pay a lot of attention, and we don't have a lot of like investigation stuff, but it's something that is currently happening, not only in Nicaragua, I would say, or Colombia, or Honduras. Actually in Costa Rica, they are already migrating because where they live is not sustainable. Then I would say as well that Latin America is one of the, well, is the most dangerous region to be an environmental defender. And I want to highlight that I don't see myself as an environmental defender. For environmental defenders, I prefer as someone as indigenous, as someone that lives in the coastal area, that live from basically from land and from, I would say, different activities that I don't. I am from the city. I am a white Latina that has a lot of privilege, that I'm able to be here, just be talking with you and not being a risk. I mean, I can get some backlash and people will talk about me in social media or whatever, but different. My life, my human rights are not being put in at risk at the same way as one of, you know, from someone from that is an indigenous will. And this is, I wanted to talk about this because we have this NGO, Global Witness. They have like an annual report about the current situation of indigenous communities and, well, like, sorry, environmental defenders in the whole world. And only last year, more than 200 indigenous were, well, environmental defenders were killed. And if we see the statistics, the Latin America was the most dangerous region. We're talking about only in Mexico, well, only in Colombia, 65 indigenous, well, environmental defenders were killed. And if we see, if we dig more into statistics, we are going to see that the indigenous communities, they are the most, you know, at risk. So, and this is also has a direct impact as we, for example, in Costa Rica, we don't have like this, thank you. And I would say this is something that because of our society that we kind of see that we live in peace, but we actually have some communities that are being risk, indigenous communities. Actually, Costa Rica has this, well, the international, the Inter-American, I forgot the actual name, but in Spanish is the, like, I forgot even in Spanish, but basically the the Inter-American Human Rights Court or Commission actually 2 years ago demanded Costa Rica to protect the Salitre community, which is an indigenous community. If we see also the statistics, those are the most, well, indigenous at risk, and we also have some, sadly, some assassinations, maybe not as Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Honduras, but we still have, and that's something that is very problematic, not only because Costa Rica is well known from being this human rights country, and maybe not the entire world is talking about this, but also as our commitment to fulfill human rights, you know, and leaving no one behind. Well, also when we talk about human rights and we talk about climate justice, we need to talk about, and this is not only like bad news. Latin America is one of the most vulnerable regions, but also has a huge opportunity for adaptation and resilience based on community and nature-based solutions. I mean, we're only talking about that in Costa Rica, we have 5% of the global biodiversity. And when we talk about this, we say that Costa Rica is way bigger in terms of oceans than land. So how we can use our resources in a way that we're going to reactivate economy without being not sustainable. We have the tools, we only need to start listening to communities, to coastal areas, to indigenous. Well, and I would say, and talking about this and the importance of having a sustainable future with reactivating economy in a way that we're protecting human rights, Latin America has this treaty, that agreement, the Discussion Agreement. The Discussion Agreement is a full milestone in terms of how we see human rights in the region. We're talking about more than 30 countries that they can sign the agreement, but right now only 12 have signed it, and Costa Rica sadly, well, ratified it. I mean, more than 20 already signed it, and only 12 ratified the agreement. Sadly, Costa Rica is not one of those that already ratified the agreement. And it is important to mention because Costa Rica was one of the founders of the agreement. Actually, Escazú is a city in Costa Rica, so this is why, you know, the name. And it's so sad because
just maybe one more minute.
Yep. Yeah, of course.
Good.
Yeah. So it's so sad in the way that Costa Rica and Chile, those were the, you know, the founders of the agreement. They haven't signed it and even ratified it. And this is why we're still fighting. We're talking about COP is happening practically 1 month, and a lot of activists from Latin America, they are not going because badges are not given to global south countries. So when we talk about climate justice, we talk about human rights, we're talking about civil society, but we need to make, you know, people to go to those conferences, to be able to talk with their president, with their being part of making decision processes. And this is what I would say that I'm fighting for. I'm just fighting for people to be listened, including myself, and just to share about how we can live in balance with nature and always protecting human rights in all the ways in which are able to. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Thank you so much for really highlighting the foundation and successes and innovations in Costa Rica and Latin America, and especially the contributions of youth. Thank you for demonstrating that to us. Thank you also for really bringing to the conversation the issues of intersectional equity and intersectional oppression, and based on our positionality, the different privileges and violences we face, especially the violences faced among Indigenous people in your area. Thank you for highlighting that, and also for landing us on COP26 and civil society and participation in that, and how important youth participation is. Appreciate that. I'd like to invite our final panelist now. Our panelist is Jennifer Uchendu. Jennifer is an ecofeminist, a sustainable development advocate. She's based in Lagos. She's the founder of Stutsi Vibes, a youth-led organization making sustainability actionable and relatable to young people. Jennifer is a sustainability communicator, an analyst, a social, her interests lie in between the intersex of youth, women, and climate action. Recently, very interestingly, she focused her research on intersectional eco-anxiety among youth climate activists. We welcome Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Maggie, and hello everyone from all over the world. That was such a brilliant recap and profile. It's been really amazing to listen to all our co-panelists talk about climate change, talk about active hope, talk about peace building, and share lived experiences. I am really honored to be part of this conversation and to be with really brilliant women who are doing their bits to make our world a better place. And really, I would like to congratulate the organizers for such a diverse and inclusive webinar that touches on intergenerational wisdom, diversity, and inclusion, the things we really need to push forward in our agenda for a peaceful and sustainable developed world. So I would like to start by saying that whether you're interested in peace building, youth development, the climate crisis, racial justice, or injustice as it were, colonization, mental health, and the need for psychosocial support within this intersects, I think it's really important for us to see that the underlying linkages between all of these big issues is that there's a human being involved, there's you and I, there's man involved. And then that gives us some hope, because it then means that there might just be a turning point if we start to increase conversations like this and just decide to change our minds, towards ushering a new way of living. Now, just as Maggie mentioned, I have been doing work on climate activism in Lagos, Nigeria, working with a large community of young people who are really passionate about the environment, passionate about sustainability and the SDGs. And interestingly, part of how we've done this work is through pop culture, music, art, dance, just looking for ways to increase participation and advocacy in Nigeria. However, I think between 2018 and 2019, I began to see this increase in overwhelm and distress with the community of young people I worked with. it seemed like we were doing so much, but the media was reporting a lot of chaos and gloom and doom. We were seeing government inaction in the face of the climate crisis. And we were also seeing our efforts, our activities, our cleanup events, our tree planting events being trivialized and being looked like young people weren't, doing enough for the climate crisis. And on the other hand, there was also this burden of hope on young people saying, you are the future, you have to change the world, you alone can solve the climate crisis. And it was so overwhelming for us. And I remember back then in 2018, wanting to sort of create some sort of yoga party, meditation party for us to just breathe, because it was becoming such a big issue for us. And then late in 2019, I was invited to COP25 in Madrid, and it was my first time attending such a massive international event. I was excited, to be in Madrid and to be part of the youth that would speak on these issues and talk about our perspectives from Nigeria. And I remember still holding the thoughts that my people were overwhelmed and being anxious about the issue, and being in such a table and being very excited. I remember being given 20 seconds to speak about my perspective, and that broke my heart. It made me really annoyed. It made me really upset. It made me grieve the fact that our perspective or whatever I had to say was not prioritized. And there and then I began to understand that what I was feeling was actually referred to as eco-anxiety. Now I know Maggie referred to the Lancet report, which I also contributed in and worked in, that looked at thousands of young people all over the world and how they were feeling about the climate crisis. Now emotions like stress, grief, guilt, anger, overwhelm, anxiety have all been linked to how young people are feeling about the climate crisis. And of course, you can't take away these emotions from the need, from the threats they have to peace, and where young people have, interrelate to it. Now, when I started understanding eco-anxiety, I decided to pour my entire research into it. At that time, I was studying for a master's in England, and I decided to sort of focus on eco-anxiety. For this talk, I would like to share 5 major things I learned from my research and how that intersects now sort of interplay with this big issue of racial oppression, decolonization, peace, and the climate crisis. Now, the very first thing I did was to sort of work with young people from all over the world, particularly young people who were climate activists living in the UK at that time. I realized that the spaces for participation for young people go beyond the regular NGO spaces or institutions. Young people are talking about the climate crisis in their homes, in their breakfast table. They're talking about it with their friends in schools. They're talking about it in several community and open spaces. So this is now a big issue. The very first thing I realized or I learned from my research is that young people really want to be told the truth about the history and root causes of the climate crisis. We do know that climate change is rooted in oppression, in violence, in very racist and power destructive structures that have for very long, enslaved particular parts of our population. And we're seeing even that the climate crisis is disproportionately impacting people, where people in vulnerable parts of the world, Nigeria, Bangladesh, are suffering the brunt of climate change more than others. So we see that climate justice is in fact another side to the coin of social justice, and young people want to be told the truth. And that's why you would see the Gen Z climate activists now advocating for inclusion, advocating for the need to have social justice as part of a climate action plan. We need to have these conversations. That is how we can start to turn the tide. That's how we can start to take action, move forward on an effective and efficient climate action for all. The second thing I realized is that we need spaces like this, virtual spaces, spaces in schools, in homes, to talk about climate change, to talk about feelings of the climate crisis, the anxiety and fear we feel. They are very valid and they are totally healthy responses to the climate crisis. Just like Laura mentioned, we need to be afraid. We need that fear to usher action, but we also need some form of optimism that would drive us, a wise optimism that drives us into action, knowing that our roles are very critical in whatever the future would be. We have that power in our hands. I'd also like to talk about the very third thing, which is that we need to move away from the burden of hope placed on young people, as we are seeing that eco-anxiety is increasing a lot in young people, whether in the global north or in the global south. While in the global north, we see climate anxiety exhibited as guilt and shame and fear of the future. For us in the global south, it's anger, it's grief. It's just being so paranoid and angry at how power structures have for many years neglected us in this part of the world, have neglected us to say, your future doesn't matter. It's that government inaction, that slap in the face, that disloyalty that we're having to contend with. Now, herein enters the idea for peace building, because from my experience in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, we have young people who are very angry. They're angry because of the impact of pollution on their livelihoods. They're angry because of the biodiversity. And when they're not engaged as early as possible, we see them become militants. We see them engage in violence. Now, this is the link. I mean, you would justify, while a young person born into this world cannot really see a future path, cannot see themselves going to school, getting a job, and having a normal life. We all agree that we have the right to, a normal well-being. These are all principles of human rights. But when the environment and our very environment when we live in are being infringed upon, are being exploited for money, where fossil fuel sort of takes the knob and capitalism and greed, takes the center stage at our detriment, we have every right to be angry. But what do we do with this anger if we don't have opportunities to engage with people, if we don't have opportunities for peaceful collaboration? And that's where peace building then comes side by side with environmental conversations, because you really need to address the emotions that young people are feeling about the loss of livelihood and biodiversity around them. And very finally, my final point in terms of what I learned from my research is that community action that inspire hope needs to be amplified. It needs to be funded. It needs to be supported, because this really is, it's a marathon and not a sprint. We don't want to just have one-off support systems and events. Organizations who say they are truly interested in a peaceful and sustainable world need to work with NGOs and local organizations as co-creators and co-partners to say that if we really are about solidarity, then we need to make this long-term. We need community-based action. We see that that is where it's most efficient at the local level, where young people are fully engaged, where young people become leaders and active participants in their future. This is how we can start to, think about a better world. And this is how, really peace can be achieved within the context of the climate crisis. A very few quotes that I love to always refer to when I think about this issue is one by Nelson Mandela. He talks about how we are all bound in ways that are invincible to the eye. While the climate crisis might not affect us in the same way, this is an us problem. It's a humanity problem. So we all really need to act. So whether it impacts your mental health today, it impacts your economic situation or migration, as Sophia mentioned, we would all face the brunt, we would all be impacted one way or the other. So we really need to think of ourselves as networked people, all connected one way or the other, and how this issue would really impact us. It's impacting us already, and it will impact us even more in the future. Now for a final sort of feedback would be, how can we think of incorporating the idea of the Ubuntu principle in conversations of peace, the climate crisis? Very similar to the framework that Laura mentioned, thinking about compassion, forgiveness, the need to move from confrontation to mediation. And that's what happened. That's what happens in the spaces where we talk about our eco-anxiety and feelings of hurt, where we move away from the blame game. Now, climate justice conversations for the longest have been a blame game. The developed world caused this, it's a power problem, and we're just stuck in that anger. I really think we need to move away from that, because that violence and anger that, you know, recurring and bringing about this conversation brings hasn't been helpful for anyone at all. And I see that, I've seen that when we open up our minds to mediation and compassion and empathy and deciding to trust one another, these are all helpful principles that we can move on and work together to save our world, really, and not put that burden on young people. So today I've sort of mentioned that young people and climate change is important for us to always look at that intersectional truths and open up the root causes of climate change. Young people want to be told the truth. When they find out they're not being told the truth, they can revolt. So you have to understand that energy we have and how it can be converted either negatively or positively. And I also spoke about climate anxiety, which is a very real emotion and something that happens for young people in both the developed world and the developing world. And for us, it's anger. It's anger, it's venom and violence. So it really needs to be safeguarded and managed. And finally, I hope finally, the final quote from Lila Watson. She says, if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. We must see solidarity as a me and you thing. You're not helping me. You're not doing me a favor. We're working together to save humanity, to save our future, to save your grandchildren, to save your great-grandchildren. And this is how we can think of a better world. Thank you all so much. Really excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm in awe and inspired by the way you created all of the interlinkages and expressed them for us. Thank you so much for giving us so much to think about and to face our fears and to live into that hope for the future. So it's also maybe a segue we can do into the Q&A portion of the event now. We've been getting some questions in the chat. We know we have a lot of people out there. We've got great comments coming in, and we'd love even more comments and questions coming into the chat now to help us inform the discussion. I think where I might like to start is just picking up on a comment, Jennifer, on Ubuntu, and thinking about the framework you mentioned for compassion and the linkages you saw to Laura's framework as well, and seeing if you could speak to us about that a little bit, and maybe we can make a connection with Laura there as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Maggie, and thank you all so much for the comments. Really encouraging for me. For me, really, the Ubuntu principle was phenomenal. Thinking about the history from South Africa, where a person commits a crime or does something wrong, and the village literally brings him or her to the middle of the village, and they all talk about good and positive things about the person. Very ironic way of dealing with conflicts in the world. You know, we would usually just get up arms, think of jail time or injustice, you know, look at all those legal frameworks on how to punish. So I thought it was really impressive, because it sort of fosters healthy living. It fosters that idea of community bonding and resilience, and how we can all work together to overcome our differences and think about ways to usher on with the world. And then bring in the idea of climate justice, which has for a very long time been a blame game of you did this, you did that, rather than how can we really collaboratively work together and take action, and how can we really support the vulnerable amongst us, you know, the people who are desperately needing climate support, who climate adaptation strategies are a priority, and how they are all linked with the idea of living. And with Ubuntu, we learn about these ways of living together, ideas around empathy and compassion, and just open up our minds to new ways of living, particularly within the climate crisis, where we are no longer working to prevent a crisis. It's here. We're seeing the news, it's all over. Every day you open the news, there's one disaster. So we're no longer trying to save the world is already in danger. We really now need to think of how can we live with the climate crisis? How can we work together to manage, of course, our mental health, and to also sort of have livable and enjoyable lives. And that's where I think the Ubuntu principle comes to play, when we think of our shared humanity and what really bonds us together as human beings. And we can now think of action and resilience working together in each of our strengths, in each of our privileges, working together and really ushering a new way of living. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That does help. Thank you for opening that up for us. And I wanted to, since you saw the connection with Laura's presentation, I wanted to invite Laura to see if you'd like to connect there.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much to all the fellow panelists, because I think it's been a very interesting journey through different experiences around the world, and to Jennifer for pulling this all together and referring it back. I think it's very important. I think the concept of Ubuntu is essential for us as activists, as practitioners around the world, as a basis not only of reflecting on ourselves and our own communities, but of thinking about the direction that we want to move. The other thing that I was very grateful to Jennifer for mentioning was the structural and systematic or systemic connections between social injustice, climate change, and the myriad other global problems that we are addressing. I would just mention, she also mentioned her frustration at being at a climate conference and being heard so little. I had a similar experience at a conference on the SDGs, a UN conference, where we were panelists discussing the importance of the arts in considering the SDGs. And I raised the question about war and militarism and why those issues are so little mentioned in the literature around the SDGs. And our panel host turned to me and said, we can't oppose war. We would all lose our jobs. We would all lose our income because our whole sector is dependent on war, because we're the ones who go in and rescue people. And I think that this is another idea that we have to consider as people who are serious about these issues, is the interconnections between the systems of war and social domination in the world and the roles that NGOs are allowed to play and what finances those. And I think we need to face those. I think we need to work together, that the basis of our work is not about our privately recycling our plastics, although that's of course important that everybody personally gets involved, but the basis is about shifting and changing the ways in which the world economies and social systems are organized. And that does go back to this concept of Ubuntu, of understanding the interconnection among all life. So I think these are important themes that we bring to this conversation, that we not only look at the personal issues, although they are extremely important, but we integrate that into looking at these systemic issues and the way that that power and wealth is organized and distributed in our world today.
I really appreciate the way that you're pulling together those different levels of understanding things, the way that things are playing out at our personal, our interpersonal level, and at these structural and systemic levels that in one way we're all participating in. And if we do the kind of work that you were suggesting, Laura, of the actions of the holding actions, and also how they link with the practice for well-being and movement that Ubuntu offers, then this is a way forward together that maybe we find our third ways, all our alternative ways to move forward. And on that idea of movement and how we can move together, we do have a question in the chat. So this question is going to Sophia, and this is about movement. This is from Leslie Snyder. What do you feel, Sophia, is needed to move forward the actual ratification and implementation of the initiatives that you were mentioning? And what is the power of young people to move this?
Yeah, so I mentioned about this CASO agreement, and I will say that this also can be like we can use it for different initiatives, and would say the power of people at the end of the day, the power of people to go out and protest, the power of people to be not afraid to join political parties, those who you feel represented, and at the end of the day, that's how it works. The way that we can go to streets, that we can go to a parliament, and we can go to a Congress to talk with your representatives and try to bond and to make them know that this is important, that we are not only talking about their own interests. I would say, I mean, we all know that when we have a president and Congress and representatives, they are if we talk about democracy, they are representing society, but they also have their own interests, and they tend to forget that their actual role is to represent society and not their interests. So the power of people is always demanding change, is transforming society, and status quo is also, actually for this CASO agreement, we have this initiative that is CASO ahora. In English is CASO now, and it's being led by youth. And for example, in Mexico, when Mexico ratified CASO agreement, people said that it was because the civil society demand, but doing an emphasis on youth. And this is why it's so important as well to bring activists to COP26. I was talking about my privilege. I was talking that I was able to go a few years ago, but now because of badges and because of pandemic and geopolitics, I still don't have a badge, and I'm still fighting to go, and not in myself, but actually other activists. We have some friends that we are talking to different NGOs, the UN, Congress, and all the persons and actors that are needed to see how we can go and how we can, not only as myself, but also as activists, as indigenous and coastal areas, that their voices are not going to be heard at one of the most important COPs of all time. And this is going, and now at the end of the day, the international community is trying to silence the the power of people. And this is not only happening at the international level, it's happening with our local communities, it's happening with Congress, it's happening with politics at the end of the day. But we're still fighting, and we will. I mean, I'm not only saying this because I'm an activist, I'm also a political scientist. So I know how this works in, as an activist, but also someone that is, part of a political party that works in Congress, and I see sometimes that I can even help, because this is how the status quo right now is working. But at the end of the day, still fighting and speaking up against any odds.
Yes, I love this theme of the power of the people, and I love how you're bringing to our attention like that power and place to speak and act, and also the challenges faced in that. And that reminds me of part of Farida's intervention. And so Farida, you had mentioned and spoke about women in Afghanistan in the face of one of the most violent regimes, the Taliban, and coming out and protesting on the street. And Farida, you had quite a lot of questions in the chat. The one I'll put to you is if you like, is there more that can be done practically to support peace builders, and we might say youth peace builders as well in conflict or post-conflict contexts. You know, especially those who have international colleagues who might have withdrawn either during the pandemic, or we can think in the Afghanistan context, withdrawn in other ways.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks so much. This question is I would say very relevant to the context of Afghanistan, because what we do need the most is the peace builders these days. I mean, this situation. And at the same time, it is a very tough question for me to respond, because that would not be only behalf of me, but behalf of a very huge group in the country. So I mean, in terms of the peace builders who are outside the country, I don't think that they do need the support the same as ones who are stuck inside the country, because as I'm in contact with my networks, with the activists who are unfortunately stuck inside the country. So at the moment, they are extremely hopeless, and I would say psychologically they are impacted badly, because I mean, we can associate that, or we can link that to many another I would say factors. That's not only about the security situation on the ground, but there's more of the economic situation. There's more of the employee situation, and also the personal status or career status of the people, as many of the NGOs, many of the INGOs left the country, and many of the young people who are particularly at the same time volunteer activists. So they are left behind, and they're dealing not only with the current situation of the security, but at the same time with those another challenges. And I think that's very, very difficult for me to say how they will be supported, because I can imagine that what they can go through, and at the moment, according to them, as I am in close contact with them, is that one of the very, very appropriate, and I would say very, very reasonable solution is to help them to get out of the country. That I think that's beyond our ability, including mine. So at the moment, that can be the only solution that I can think of. But if I go beyond of this solution, I think at the moment that can help them temporarily with to completely understand the anxiety they go through, because I went through when I was stuck in Kabul, is I think to distract them with having more of such events, though they do not have very consistent access to internet. But I think at the same time it can help them to a very not to some extent to deal with their anxiety, to be in touch with the international people, and to make them think that there are people out of the country who think of you, I mean, at this level. Because one of the major complaint of young people is that they think that the world has turned their back to them, and they are not, I would say, as a supportive as they thought. So I think giving them such a feeling can help them to some extent to be hopeful of the future, at least.
Yes. Thank you for taking on that challenging question. We had other great questions coming in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get to them. We're going to close the panel now. Just the warmest, biggest thanks to all the panelists today. You are inspiring and you lead us forward. Please continue to do so. Over to Ananda.
Thanks so much. I'm sorry that we're running out of time. I think we could have gone on for longer, but I just want to thank all of you so very much for attending the webinar today, and especially to our panelists, Laura, Farida, Sophia, Jennifer, who've, I think, moved us with their presentations, but also given us a lot to think about. I'd like to really thank the interpreter team with Milka, Moses, Stratton, and Douglas, who've made this webinar all the more accessible. And last but not least, along with, on behalf of the colleagues at the MHPSS and Peacebuilding Working Group, I'm ever so grateful to Maggie, our moderator, for convening this wonderful exchange. Muted. It was just muted. I really hope that this webinar continues to provoke your thinking and actions and as we go forward, and this conversation continues. So on behalf of the working group, thank you so much, and have a good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are.